They lit up the screen like no one else during Hollywood's golden age, but behind the glamour, their lives were ticking time bombs. Off camera, they spiraled into chaos, trading red carpets for fistfights, studio contracts for courtroom battles. Scandals, betrayals, and meltdowns didn't just haunt them, they defined them. In this series, we peel back the curtain on 20 iconic stars whose real-life drama burned hotter than anything they ever filmed. Buckle up, because the truth is wilder than fiction. Errol Flynn. Few stars ever captured the silver screen sense of danger and desire like Errol Flynn. With his devil-may-care grin and sword in hand, he defined Hollywood's golden age of swashbuckling heroes. But behind that dazzling smile was a man consumed by chaos. Flynn lived fast. Too fast. His wild parties were legendary, his list of lovers endless. But in 1942, the fantasy came crashing down when he was charged with statutory rape, igniting a scandal that rocked the nation. Though he was ultimately acquitted, the damage was done. Studios began to distance themselves, quietly pulling him from top-tier roles. Off-camera, Flynn was just as explosive. He was known to erupt in drunken rages, once even pistol-whipping a neighbor during a petty argument over a parking spot. Whispers of hidden weapons and violent outbursts only fed the myth of a man spiraling out of control. Directors put up with him because audiences couldn't get enough, but every set he walked onto came with risk. While filming in Trinidad, his off-set debauchery got so out of hand that authorities nearly deported him. The man who once ruled the box office was now becoming a liability. Years of excess caught up with him, ravaging his body with heart disease and cirrhosis. By the late 1950s, Errol Flynn was a shadow of the star he once was, reduced to churning out forgettable low-budget films, far from the glamour of old Hollywood. He died at just 50, his heart giving out after a lifetime of indulgence. Flynn left behind more than a trail of broken rules. He left a legacy marked by brilliance, scandal, and self-destruction. Worshipped on screen, whispered about off it, he was the ultimate Hollywood contradiction, a man undone by the very passions that made him unforgettable. Hoy ChatGPT. Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum, if Hollywood ever had a true outlaw, it was him. With his rugged features and effortless cool, Mitchum didn't just play danger on screen, he lived it. In 1948, the rebel image became reality when he was arrested for marijuana possession. Sentenced to 60 days behind bars, he didn't crumble. Instead, he read poetry, joked with guards, and emerged from jail not disgraced, but even more magnetic. Studios panicked. Could this wild card be trusted? But the public couldn't get enough. The scandal only added to his mystique. Mitchum became infamous for his off-screen brawls and his flat refusal to play by Hollywood's rules. He once stormed off the set of Heaven Knows, Mr. Allison over a pay dispute, leaving producers scrambling. Directors treated him like a live wire, unpredictable, volatile, but capable of sheer brilliance. And that unpredictability was exactly what made him unforgettable. His performances carried a raw, dangerous energy that no polished studio puppet could replicate. Films like Out of the Past cemented his legend. He never shook the bad boy label, but he didn't need to. Mitchum turned rebellion into a brand, proving that sometimes Hollywood's greatest risk can become its most iconic reward. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando didn't just act, he erupted onto the screen like a force of nature. When he unleashed his raw intensity in a streetcar named Desire, Hollywood was mesmerized. He wasn't just performing, he was reinventing the craft, dragging it into a new era with his revolutionary method acting. But behind the scenes, Brando was a storm no one could tame. He clashed with directors, vanished from sets without warning, and fueled endless headlines with bar fights and defiant interviews. One day, he'd deliver a soul-shattering performance. The next, he'd disappear into the New York night, leaving chaos in his wake. His relationship with director Elia Kazan imploded during On the Waterfront, with Brando openly accusing Kazan of betrayal and nearly walking off the film entirely. That same year, he was photographed trading punches outside a Manhattan nightclub, a moment that crystallized his reputation as both brilliant and dangerous. Studios quickly realized that working with Brando meant surrendering control. They gave him creative freedom few stars had ever wielded, reshaping the power structure of Hollywood itself. But Brando's defiance came at a cost. His unpredictability made producers nervous. Projects passed him by, and for years, he fought to reclaim the spotlight he once dominated. By the 1970s, disillusioned with fame, he retreated to isolated islands, far from flashing cameras and studio contracts. His legacy remains a paradox, an untamed genius who revolutionized cinema, even as he stood at war with the very system that made him a legend. Richard Burton. Richard Burton's voice wasn't just memorable, it was magnetic. Deep, thunderous, and emotionally charged, it could stir souls or strike fear. But behind that commanding presence was a man consumed by demons. A brilliant intellect and a notorious drinker, Burton's life off-screen spiraled into chaos. Much of it centered around his volatile, obsessive love affair with Elizabeth Taylor. Their legendary romance, equal parts passion and destruction, became front-page news, with breakups, reconciliations, and lavish gifts played out for the world to see. On the set of Cleopatra, their chemistry was electric and explosive. Production delays, budget blowouts, and screaming matches became routine. Burton once stormed off the set after clashing with director Joseph L. Mankiewicz, halting filming for a full week. In London, paparazzi chased his car, and sometimes he chased them back, fueled by jealous rages and scotch. His off-screen turbulence soon eclipsed his talent. As the drinking worsened, so did his health and reputation. That once resonant voice began to fade, and major studios grew reluctant to hire him. Roles dwindled. Projects shrank. Only those willing to accommodate his volatility dared to take him on. And yet, in his sober moments, Burton's brilliance shone through. Raw, tortured, unforgettable. In his final years, he sought sobriety and reflection. But the scars were deep. Richard Burton, once the thunderous force who shook the foundations of Hollywood, became a tragic symbol of talent undone, not just remembered for his Shakespearean mastery, but for the storm that raged behind the curtain. John Barrymore. John Barrymore wasn't just a star, he was a force of nature. Dubbed the Great Profile, his Shakespearean mastery and smoldering screen presence made him a legend in both theater and film. But behind that iconic face was a man battling demons far bigger than any role he ever played. By the 1930s, Barrymore's performances were no longer known for brilliance, but for breakdowns. His mornings began with hangovers and slurred lines, and too often, he didn't show up at all. Studios scrambled to save him, hiring fixers, feeding him milk of magnesia, and even training stand-ins to mimic his style. On the set of Svengali, he was so drunk he could barely stay upright, forcing the director to shoot around his staggering movements. The tabloids devoured every disaster. Barrymore collapsing mid-scene, passed out cold in his dressing room, or wandering set like a ghost, earning him cruel nicknames like the Ancient Mariner. Once paid $5,000 a week and hailed as Hollywood royalty, he was soon reduced to begging for roles in cheap B-movies, his star power dimmed by addiction and regret. As his health crumbled, so did his career. When John Barrymore died at 60, it wasn't just the death of an actor, it was the tragic fall of a genius who burned too brightly, too fast. His story is a haunting reminder that even the most dazzling brilliance can be no match for the darkness within. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney was a pint-sized powerhouse on screen, but off-camera, his life spun wildly out of control. By the late 1940s, he was Hollywood's biggest box office draw, a name that lit up marquees. But behind that trademark grin was a man drowning in excess, addiction, and chaos. Rooney gambled away entire fortunes, piling up millions in debt and unpaid taxes. At lavish parties, he was a whirlwind of bravado, glass in hand, daring anyone to challenge him in reckless games that often ended in bruises, broken furniture, or broken friendships. His personal life was just as turbulent. With 8 marriages behind him, each more disastrous than the last, Rooney's love life became a tabloid circus and a financial drain. The studios that once fought to showcase his boundless energy slowly backed away. By the mid-1950s, the golden boy's shine had faded. Producers saw him as a liability, not an asset. On low-budget sets, he'd disappear for hours, returning hungover and demanding script changes. His volcanic temper cleared rooms, costumers, crew, even directors scattered when his rage erupted. He once stormed off a soundstage, hurling curses into the Los Angeles night. By the 1960s, Mickey Rooney had fallen from beloved icon to industry cautionary tale. The roles dried up. He was reduced to cameos, guest spots, and the occasional pity casting. It wasn't until years later, through raw and regretful memoirs, that Rooney reclaimed some of the affection he'd lost, reminding the world of the child star they had once adored, and the man who nearly lost it all. James Dean. James Dean wasn't just a rising star, he was a wildfire. In the fleeting span between 1955 and 1956, he delivered 3 unforgettable performances in East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant, etching his name into Hollywood legend. But off-screen, his life burned even brighter, and far more dangerously. Obsessed with speed, Dean tore through the night on Mulholland Drive, bragging about hitting 120 miles per hour and surviving a near-fatal crash that left him with chronic injuries. Friends described him as electric, brilliant, brooding, and on edge. After a furious argument over creative control, he once shattered a bottle against a bar mirror, slicing open his hand as glass rained down like confetti from a breakdown. His unpredictability became notorious, vanishing mid-shoot, racing off in his beloved Porsche Spyder, and even skipping rehearsals for underground boxing matches. Studio execs were exasperated. Warner's nearly replaced him. But no one could deny his magnetism. Then, on September 30, 1955, tragedy struck. At just 24, Dean's life was cut short in a devastating crash near Paso Robles. It was heartbreakingly poetic. In death, he became more than a star. He became a myth. Hollywood had plans to tame him. Fate had other ideas. And what he left behind was not just a career cut short, but a blazing legacy of rebellion, danger, and a spirit that refused to be caged. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift wasn't just a movie star, he was a revelation. His haunted gaze and raw vulnerability redefined screen acting, captivating audiences with a depth few could match. But behind the camera, his life was unraveling. A near-fatal car crash in 1956 left him permanently disfigured, both in body and spirit. The once idolized face was now marked by pain, and with it, his self-assurance began to crumble. Desperate for relief, Clift turned to alcohol and prescription pills, drifting through Hollywood parties in a fog of addiction and despair. Rumors swirled about his trembling hands, his slurred speech, his unpredictable moods. Directors whispered and co-stars worried as he showed up late, or not at all, to sets. On the set of Judgment at Nuremberg, Clift was a shadow of his former self. Heavy prosthetics masked his injuries, but nothing could disguise the torment in his eyes. Fellow actors had to guide him to his marks, while filmmakers worked around his instability, hoping to salvage fragments of brilliance. Still, even at his lowest, Clift could deliver performances that left audiences breathless. His talent flickered like a dying star, tragic, beautiful, and impossible to ignore. But as the 1960s wore on, roles dried up. Hollywood, ever hungry for the next young face, moved on. Clift died in 1966 at just 45 years old, his potential never fully realized. What remains is a legacy drenched in sadness and brilliance, a haunting reminder of what genius can look like when it's devoured by demons. Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin was the very embodiment of the Hollywood tough guy. His gravelly voice and chiseled jawline were made for war films and westerns. But off-camera, he was even more explosive than the characters he played. A decorated Marine who saw brutal combat in World War II, Marvin didn't leave the battlefield behind when he came home. He carried the war with him, in his fists, in his fury. Bar brawls, street fights, and drunken scuffles became his calling card from Los Angeles to New Orleans. Club owners feared him, studio heads tread lightly, and producers knew better than to say no. During filming of The Dirty Dozen, Marvin demanded his salary be doubled just to agree to cut back on drinking during shoots. Off-set, he pushed his body to the brink, daring co-stars into bare-knuckle fights that sometimes ended in bloodied faces. In one stunt gone wrong, he nearly lost an eye. Most actors would have taken time off. Marvin just gritted his teeth and insisted they reshoot the scene, with the one good eye he had left. Hollywood tolerated it all, because Marvin sold tickets. Cat Ballou earned him an Oscar, and studios bent over backward to keep him happy. But by the 1970s, the storm he'd ridden to fame began to turn on him. Directors brought in ex-Marines just to manage him on set, and production costs ballooned thanks to his unpredictable behavior. Though he never stopped working, the fire that once made him a legend began to flicker. The same chaos that once fueled his rise slowly chipped away at his edge, leaving behind a legend haunted by the ghosts of his own myth. Let me know if you'd like an alternate version with a different. Orson Wells. Orson Wells. He wasn't just a cinematic genius, he was a storm wrapped in charisma. While the world hailed him as a visionary director, Wells was just as captivating in front of the camera, and just as volatile behind it. His drinking became legend on set, sipping whiskey between takes, slurring lines, forgetting cues. On Citizen Kane, his obsession with perfection turned into a form of madness, demanding endless rewrites, filming scenes 50 times just to capture a fleeting feeling. He'd scribble changes in hotel rooms at midnight, leaving producers scrambling to buy more shooting days. His ego was massive, his temper mercurial. When The Magnificent Ambersons was recut without his approval, Wells publicly disowned it, setting off a war with RKO that led to his unofficial blacklisting. Exiled from Hollywood, Wells drifted through Europe, pouring his soul into self-financed films with threadbare budgets. He'd often show up on set already drunk, forcing weary crews to shoot through the night. Studios found him too unpredictable, too defiant. The offers stopped coming. In his final years, the once great auteur took on voiceover work and passion projects that rarely reached an audience. When he died in 1985, he left behind more than just classic films. He left a legacy of brilliance shadowed by chaos. A genius whose greatest battle was not with the industry, but with himself. Hoy ChatGPT. Clark Gable. Clark Gable, the undisputed king of Hollywood, was magnetic on screen, but off camera, he lived like a man racing fate. Obsessed with fast cars and high-stakes gambling, Gable didn't just flirt with danger, he chased it. In one infamous moment, he bet an entire week's salary on a single roll of the dice at a Santa Monica casino. He won, and immediately risked it all again, hungry for a bigger rush. Behind studio doors, his benders were legendary. He'd vanish for days on alcohol-fueled escapades, leaving film crews waiting and productions halted. On the set of Mutiny on the Bounty, a simple accident, a spilled cup of coffee, sent him into a white-hot rage. Gable hurled a chair through a soundproof window, sending shattered glass flying and scattering terrified crew members. Word spread quickly. Working with Gable was like walking a tightrope over dynamite. One wrong step, and everything could explode. Yet, despite his volatility, studios bent to his will.
Why?
Because Gable meant sold-out theaters and soaring profits. He demanded private trailers stocked with liquor and chauffeurs on standby for midnight joyrides, and he got them. But the cost of that charisma was steep. His 4 marriages buckled under the weight of his infidelities and unpredictable moods. By the 1950s, his health began to deteriorate, eroded by the very recklessness that had built his myth. When Clark Gable died of a heart attack at just 59, Hollywood mourned a legend, but behind the tributes was an unspoken truth. Gable didn't just live like a king. He burned like a comet, brilliant, dangerous, and ultimately consumed by his own fire. Wallace Berry. Wallace Berry was a giant, on screen and off, but not always in the ways Hollywood liked to celebrate. With a booming voice and a hulking frame, he brought unforgettable presence to the silver screen. But behind the scenes, Berry was a storm of chaos, violence, and self-destruction. Born in 1885, he rose to fame during the silent film era, but his most explosive performances often took place when the cameras weren't rolling. Whispers followed him through the backlots, tales of drunken rampages and violent outbursts. During the 1932 filming of Treasure Island, Berry flew into a rage when a crew member refused to fetch him another drink from his trailer. The altercation turned into a full-blown brawl that spilled onto a nearby dock. Berry, for all his friendly screen charm, landed a punch so hard it cracked ribs and nearly knocked a man into the harbor. Filming was shut down for 3 days, and security had to remove him from the set. But when Treasure Island became a massive hit, MGM executives waved it off as artistic temperament. In truth, Berry's temper was anything but artistic. Fueled by alcohol, he was known to polish off a bottle of whiskey before lunch. His mood swings became legendary. Directors dreaded working with him. Costume designers trembled when he tore apart their work, snarling that it wasn't fit for a proper pirate. Over time, Hollywood typecast him as rough, gruff characters. His days as a leading man were over. As newer, more disciplined stars captured the spotlight, Berry's career began to fade. When he died in 1949, the obituaries praised his talent. But in the shadows, the darker legend endured. Wallace Berry's story stands as a cautionary tale, a reminder that no amount of fame can silence the damage caused by unchecked rage and addiction. Rosco "Fatty" Arbuckle. Rosco "Fatty" Arbuckle was once the king of silent film comedy, a beloved giant whose slapstick brilliance lit up the silver screen. But in 1921, his dazzling career came crashing down when he was accused of manslaughter in the tragic death of actress Virginia Rapp. The story became front-page tabloid fuel, wild parties, whispered debauchery, and a public eager for scandal. Though he was acquitted after 3 grueling trials, the verdict didn't matter. Hollywood turned its back on him. His films were pulled, his reputation shredded, and his name became a cautionary tale of fame gone rotten. Off-screen, Arbuckle's life spiraled. He sank into depression, haunted by the media circus and public betrayal. Alcohol became his constant companion. Blacklisted and desperate to stay in the industry he once ruled, he adopted pseudonyms and worked behind the scenes, but the whispers never stopped. When he tried to mount a comeback in 1923, theaters refused to show his films and audiences jeered at his name. The laughter he once inspired had turned to mockery. By the end, Arbuckle was a shadow of his former self. He ran a modest cafe in New York, where few recognized him beyond the crude caricatures that once made him famous. On June 29, 1933, at just 46 years old, he died of a heart attack, alone, discarded by the very world that once adored him. Today, he's remembered not for revolutionizing physical comedy, but for the scandal that erased his legacy. A tragic reminder that in Hollywood, one night can destroy a lifetime of brilliance. W.C. Fields. W.C. Fields wasn't just playing a bizarre comic character, he was living it. Off-screen, he was a hard-drinking misanthrope who openly loathed children, dogs, and anyone in authority. His home and film sets were littered with hidden stashes of liquor, and he often performed with a flask of whiskey tucked discreetly into his suit. The booze was no prop. Fields was frequently so drunk that he slurred his lines, forgot cues, and had to be physically propped up between takes. During the filming of The Old-Fashioned Way, he showed up so intoxicated he couldn't even stand. The director was forced to shoot him lying down on a chaise, using clever camera angles to disguise his condition. His co-stars learned to adapt, improvising lines when Fields blacked out mid-scene, covering for his erratic behavior without missing a beat. Yet somehow, through all the haze of alcohol and chaos, his brilliance never dulled. Audiences roared at his irreverent wit, his masterful timing, and his total disregard for convention. Behind the scenes, though, his personal life unraveled. Fields went through 2 bitter divorces, with whispers of violent outbursts and drunken tantrums haunting his reputation. Studios tolerated the mayhem because his films, like It's a Gift, were pure box office gold. But by the late 1930s, the toll was undeniable. Cirrhosis and ulcers ravaged his body as he stubbornly continued to drink himself into oblivion. When he finally succumbed to kidney failure in 1946, Hollywood lost one of its strangest, most brilliant outlaws. His legacy, a mix of genius and self-destruction, remains a haunting reminder that the line between comedy and tragedy is often razor-thin. Hoy ChatGPT. James Kagney. James Kagney didn't just act, he detonated on screen. With a presence that could electrify a theater, he became the face of cinematic rebellion. But off-camera, Kagney was just as volatile as the gangsters he so often portrayed. His infamous temper was no act. During the filming of The Public Enemy, a jammed prop gun sent him into a fury. Enraged that it disrupted his performance, he grabbed the camera himself, improvised the scene, and demanded the crew keep rolling until they gave in. His behind-the-scenes battles were just as explosive. Kagney went to war with studio titan Jack Warner, refusing to be shackled by the era's ironclad studio contracts. In 1935, he made Hollywood history by walking off set and taking Warner Brothers to court. After months of fierce legal wrangling, he won, not just a better deal for himself, but a victory for all actors who came after. But the fight took its toll. During this period, Kagney spiraled into heavy drinking, spending long nights in speakeasies and smoky backrooms where poker games turned violent. By the early 1940s, he was both admired and avoided. Directors loved his talent but feared his unpredictability. Still, he delivered masterful performances in Yankee Doodle Dandy and White Heat, earning an Academy Award and solidifying his legend. Eventually, the fire that once raged in rebellion was redirected into his art. Kagney retired in the 1960s, stepping away from the spotlight on his own terms. He lived out his days quietly, passing away at 86. In the end, it was his refusal to be controlled, by studios, by fame, or even by his own demons, that made James Kagney not just a star, but a force of nature Hollywood will never forget. Tyrone Power. Tyrone Power was the epitome of Hollywood's golden age heartthrob, charming, dashing, and irresistibly magnetic on screen. But behind the polished smile and matinee idol looks was a man addicted to danger, both in love and at the gambling table. Power lived for the thrill, burning through fortunes in baccarat dens in Paris and slipping into shadowy poker rooms in Los Angeles where the stakes matched his appetite for risk. His mood on set was as unpredictable as the turn of a card. Directors told stories of him vanishing mid-shoot to chase a win or bury a loss, only to return hours later and deliver a performance so mesmerizing it seemed fueled by adrenaline and heartbreak. Off-screen, his affairs were the stuff of legend. He seduced leading ladies and socialites with ease, leaving behind a trail of broken engagements and whispered scandals. Studio execs tried everything: chaperones, curfews, even rewriting travel schedules, to rein in their unpredictable star. But Power lived by his own rules. In one infamous episode, he disappeared to a private island with a European heiress and returned days later with a duffel bag of cash, and rumors of a six-figure, under-the-table poker win. Through the 1940s, his star power seemed unstoppable. Films like The Black Swan and Blood and Sand solidified his place in the Hollywood pantheon. But by the early 50s, the consequences of his high-octane lifestyle began catching up. Chronic fatigue, bleeding ulcers, and mounting scandals chipped away at his reputation. Studios, once eager to showcase his name above the title, began to grow cautious, casting him less often and with smaller budgets. Then came the final blow. In 1958, Tyrone Power collapsed on set and died of a heart attack at just 44 years old. Hollywood was stunned. Colleagues mourned the man who could captivate an audience with a glance, yet couldn't outrun the chaos that consumed him. His legacy remains a dazzling but cautionary tale, a reminder that even the brightest stars can burn out too soon, brought down not by talent, but by the demons they can't leave behind. Humphrey Bogart. On screen, Humphrey Bogart was the ultimate tough guy, cool, commanding, untouchable. But behind the camera, he lived just as hard as the roles he played. A notorious drinker with a taste for smoky speakeasies, Bogart would often hold court with a drink in hand, daring anyone to challenge him. Stories of late-night bar brawls followed him everywhere. One infamous fight ended with Bogart and a rival actor slugging it out until police dragged them away, battered but unbroken. His personal life was just as volatile. His first two marriages crumbled under the weight of jealousy, explosive arguments, and whispers of infidelity. Co-stars recalled him storming into hotel rooms unannounced, furious over rumors of on-set flirtations. During the grueling shoot of The African Queen, Bogart famously manhandled a cameraman for adjusting the lens without asking, shoving him against the boat until the crew pulled him off. And yet, Warner Brothers turned a blind eye. Because when Bogart's name was on the marquee, tickets flew. Films like Casablanca and The Maltese Falcon weren't just hits, they became legend, blurring the line between the roles he played and the man he really was. But living on the edge came at a price. By the late 1950s, years of hard living began to take their toll. Bogart was chain-smoking nearly 4,000 cigarettes a month. Roles dried up as studios grew uneasy about his health and mounting medical costs. In 1957, at just 57 years old, Bogart died of esophageal cancer. His final curtain call a stark reminder of the cost of the myth he embodied. Humphrey Bogart didn't just play the rebel, he lived it. And in doing so, became both a Hollywood icon and a cautionary tale about the price of never backing down. Jack Palance. Jack Palance wasn't just acting when he played tough guys, he was one. Towering and intense, Palance brought a raw, physical danger to the screen that came straight from real life. Before Hollywood, he was a professional boxer who knew how to land a punch, and wasn't shy about proving it. On set, younger actors quickly learned not to cross him. Legend has it he once overheard a group of rookies mocking his accent, then challenged them to unarmed combat. Security had to step in when he pinned one to the wall and demanded an apology. But Palance's appetite for danger didn't stop there. While filming Shane, he insisted on performing his own stunts, including brutal horse falls that left him with broken ribs and a fractured collarbone, shutting down production for weeks. He refused to use doubles, earning admiration from cast and crew, but also a reputation as a relentless perfectionist who'd rather endure real pain than fake it. Off camera, he lived just as recklessly. He tore through the Hollywood hills on motorcycles and once entered a midnight drag race in a borrowed Corvette, nearly flying off a cliff when the brakes failed. To some, He was a thrill-seeking legend. To studios, he was a walking liability. Still, his fierce presence lit up the screen in films like Shane and City Slickers, earning him 2 Oscar nominations and a place among cinema's unforgettable icons. But as the years caught up with him, so did the toll of his stunts. Studios quietly began scripting early exits for his characters, a subtle admission that Jack Palance's greatest threat wasn't his enemies. It was Jack Palance himself. Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen wasn't just the king of cool, he defined it, both on and off the screen. A former Marine with a rebel streak a mile wide, McQueen had an insatiable need for speed. His garage was a shrine to adrenaline. Custom motorcycles and sports cars tuned for one thing, illegal street races tearing through the curves of Mulholland Drive. That need for velocity landed him in jail more than once, including after a high-speed crash that nearly killed a pedestrian. His response? A cocky grin and a cold line, "The winner never stops to take a look." But McQueen's danger didn't stop with the gas pedal. He had a combustible temper that turned film sets into war zones. On Bullet, he famously stormed off after arguing over a stunt, forcing the studio to scramble and rehire a double. And he didn't just play tough, he was tough. He broke a rib filming The Great Escape, dislocated a shoulder shooting The Hunter, and refused to stop rolling. Painkillers became a crutch, and his relentless drive left him with chronic back pain and a reputation so risky that insurers hiked premiums just to cover him. Still, audiences couldn't get enough. Whether in The Thomas Crown Affair or Le Mans, McQueen's raw magnetism lit up the screen. But the very obsession that made him a legend, racing, may have also sealed his fate. After battling mesothelioma, likely linked to years around race car brake dust and asbestos-laden helmets, he died at just 50. Steve McQueen didn't just play the antihero, he was one. Reckless, magnetic, and tragically human. He lived fast, broke the rules, and left behind a legacy that still whispers through Hollywood, "Cool isn't safe, it's dangerous." Hoy ChatGPT. Anthony Quinn. Anthony Quinn wasn't just a powerhouse on screen, he was a storm in human form. Known for his searing portrayals of doomed lovers and defiant warriors, Quinn's real-life temperament was just as combustible. Off-camera, he was a man of fierce contradictions, capable of deep tenderness one moment and volcanic rage the next. His first marriage collapsed after a jealous outburst turned violent. Enraged by what he thought was a slight from his wife, he hurled furniture across their New York apartment, sending a lamp crashing through a window and shattering any hope of reconciliation. On set, his intensity was both a gift and a curse. During the filming of Viva Zapata, Quinn erupted into a furious tirade, demanding extra rehearsal time and berating both the director and his co-stars for hours. Crew members walked on eggshells, but when he finally calmed down, he delivered a performance that won him an Oscar. It was a pattern that followed him throughout his career, brilliance fueled by chaos. His unpredictable mood stretched productions, ballooned budgets, and strained relationships, but the raw power he brought to the screen was undeniable. His thirst for danger didn't stop at the set. At one Hollywood party, Quinn hired a lion tamer to bring a live lion as entertainment. When the beast was unleashed for a photo op, guests scattered in panic. No one was hurt, but the message was clear: with Quinn, anything could happen. As he aged, the fire within him didn't burn out, it simply found new direction. He channeled his passion into painting and sculpture, creative outlets that finally matched his intensity without causing destruction. Anthony Quinn passed away at 86, leaving behind a legacy marked by raw talent, unrelenting energy, and a spirit too wild to be tamed. He was one of the most dangerously brilliant actors of Hollywood's golden age, a man whose genius blazed brightly, sometimes too brightly, for the world around him.